Hi there, this is John Wilkinson again from History Made Easier, looking at what tipped America to go to war in Vietnam, with bombing campaigns and troops on the ground. America still had choices, but I think what you should be asking yourself is whether it had reached a point where it would simply lose too much if it backed away. President Johnson had kept Kennedy's team of advisers, and he was receiving mixed advice as to how America should retrieve the mess it was in. Should it push for a political solution, which would mean a neutral government? Should it help Saigon more to take on the Viet Cong? Or was a major American effort needed? The Joint Chiefs of Staff recommended covert American air attacks against key Viet Cong targets, coupled with NRVA attacks into North Vietnam. But the CIA advised that attacks on the north, far from improving the situation, could produce serious negative repercussions. Meanwhile, there was a second military coup in Saigon at the end of January 1964, yet nothing seemed to change. When the Secretary of Defense, Robert McNamara, visited Vietnam in March 1964, he concluded that South Vietnam faced potential collapse. But Johnson was deeply concerned as to just what America was getting into. He was facing a presidential election later that year and didn't want to damage his campaign. He was also concerned about the state of America, and he wanted to push through legislation to ensure civil and political rights and build a better, stronger America. A noble aim. This was his great society. Following his visit to Vietnam in March 1964, McNamara recommended that America should not get directly involved, but should boost morale in the South by affirming its long-term commitment by providing more equipment and training, so that the NRVA could increase its forces, and use American air power to block supplies coming down the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Withdrawal or attacks against the North were politically untenable, he thought. Johnson felt that McNamara's proposals at least had the advantage of buying time before more decisive decisions might be forced on him. But the Vietnam debate continued in Washington through the spring and summer of 1964. Meanwhile, on the day Kennedy was assassinated, back in November 1963, the Vietnamese Communist Party met to decide their own strategy, with two distinct factions as to how best to proceed: continue cautiously or be more aggressive. The Soviet Union and the PRC were similarly split. The Soviet Union urged caution. The PRC favoured an aggressive approach. What was agreed was a two-phase approach: major battles to destroy the ARVN forces, followed by attacks in the cities to set off popular revolts. America was unaware of this internal battle, but they would soon see the consequences, for as a result, the situation in South Vietnam soon got worse for the Americans, both militarily and politically. By the end of 1964, the NLF controlled 40% of the countryside and 50% of the South Vietnamese population. Meanwhile, in Saigon, there had been more military coups as the generals fought each other. Between January 1964 and June 1965, there would be 8 different governments. President Johnson faced an impossible political dilemma. His advisers wanted to increase America's involvement, but could not guarantee success, while Congress wanted victory, but at minimal cost. While reports from the CIA continued to be pessimistic about Saigon's ability to hold on. The paradoxes facing Johnson were clear. Saigon's inability to save itself meant that in order to keep South Vietnam independent, America had to take control. Well, and this was more worrying for Johnson, the domestic backlash would be considerable, whether America entered the war or if Vietnam was lost. So, he authorized the secret bombing of the Viet Cong supply routes in Laos, and he also authorized the use of American advisors to oversee raids on South Vietnamese coastal bases, again in secret. But he refused the deployment of combat troops. It was an election year, and Vietnam was the key electoral issue. He was also worried about how China would respond. And he had other considerations, notably his ambitious Great Society. Johnson was running out of options, though he was leaning towards asking Congress for a resolution giving him authority to use military force. But he was fully aware that he would face considerable opposition to direct American involvement, and that would be politically dangerous for him. Then Johnson was handed a get-out-of-jail card. The Americans had been sending ships into the Gulf of Tonkin off the North Vietnamese coast on intelligence-gathering missions. And on the night of August the 2nd, 1964, the destroyer Maddox was attacked by North Vietnamese boats whilst in international waters, though just a few nights before, South Vietnamese ships had shelled 2 North Vietnamese islands. The Americans warned the North Vietnamese that it would not tolerate a similar attack. 2 days later, though, both the Maddox and another ship reported that radar indicated they had been attacked. It's most likely that this second attack did not occur. The weather conditions had been bad, and apparently that messes up radar. And the American administration was aware of the grave doubts regarding the second attack. Nevertheless, Johnson ordered airstrikes against the North Vietnamese patrol boat bases, and the Gulf of Tonkin resolution was presented for congressional approval. The way in which the evidence was presented to Congress was misleading, and the resolution was passed with a unanimous vote in the House and only 2 dissenting votes in the Senate. It declared that the United States regards as vital to its national interest and to world peace the maintenance of international peace and security in Southeast Asia, and it gave the President the authority as Commander-in-Chief to take all necessary measures to repel any armed attack against the forces of the United States and to prevent further aggression. Johnson had gained congressional approval to go to war, on the back of at best a half-truth. But with the American election just days away, the way in which Johnson had responded to the Gulf of Tonkin incident saw his approval ratings leap, and he won in a landslide. Still, Johnson didn't want to drag America into all-out war. But with the election won, and so a genuine mandate to govern, which he felt he didn't have as the successor to an assassinated president, Johnson agreed to a graduated response, which meant, at first, limited air attacks, but not sustained bombing, and no ground troops. But a week after his inauguration in January 1965, his national security advisor handed him a memorandum telling him that the strategy was not working. There was even fighting close to Saigon. The Viet Cong's tactics and their fighting spirit were reasons, but so too was the poor leadership and the low morale of the ARVN. What's more, tension between the ARVN leaders and the American advisors was increasing. Johnson had two choices: negotiate a face-saving settlement or apply more force. Both McGeorge Bundy, his national security advisor, and Robert McNamara, his Secretary of Defense, wanted more force. There were worries about Johnson's Great Society. America couldn't afford both. Of the damage being done to America's image in the world, and of relations with the Soviet Union. But Johnson decided on sustained and systematic bombing aimed at military targets and communication lines. This was rolling thunder, and it started in March 1965. Johnson also agreed to send more men, 50,000 of them, with more to follow if it proved necessary, which it would. These were troops that would be used not just for the defense of American bases, but as combat troops. And so, drip by drip, America found itself at war in Vietnam, even if Americans wouldn't be told just yet. Now, I hope this has been useful for you. That's certainly my intent. Don't forget, I might have a tutorial slot available if you think that might help you. My aim, of course, would be to lift your grade as high as we can get it. Just get your parents to get in touch with me at historymadeeasier@gmail.com, and we'll see if we can sort something out. But for now, let me thank you for listening and wish you the very best of luck in your studies. Cheers.